Andy, 12 years on since the Icehouse was formed, and I'm thinking, where are we at in that entrepreneurship cycle? And I wonder how you're thinking now, perhaps to where you were thinking when the Icehouse was formed 12 years ago.
Well, it's quite kind of hard, Andrew, to look back and say, what was I thinking 12 years ago? Because I don't really remember it. I was young back then. I think it's interesting. I think what's really important is that you continue to evolve and you continue to be maybe on the edge and slightly paranoid and not comfortable, because if you are comfortable, then I don't think we're going to be able to do the stuff that we need to do to help the companies grow. So I just think, maybe sometimes I get concerned that we're not fresh enough, and that I'm not fresh enough. But I think the team, when I look at the stuff that we're doing now versus a year ago, 2 years, 3 years ago, let alone when we knew nothing 12 years ago, it's kind of interesting. It's cool.
You've always been ambitious with the goals for this organisation.
Yeah.
The 10-year anniversary, you set the 3000.org. How has that panned out?
Yeah, that's a good question. Look, I think pretty good. I think, like any good idea, you need to fill it up with some detail and staircase it and actually say, how are you going to deliver on that? And as an organisation, and with my board these days, we've got this rallying cry of turning that 3,000 into our 1,000. And so we are now, later this year, we'll come out with this framework called Businesses of International Quality, which is the measurement framework and behind that, and some quant and qualitative criteria. And next year, which is really exciting for us, we are going to be redesigning all of our programs in the context of this BIQ framework. And that's scary, right? Because we're going to throw stuff out that doesn't enable us to achieve that BIQ endgame. So, I think, that pushing forward from what feels like a lifetime ago, that ICE Ideas and, 2011, we need to keep doing that. And I think we've been going through a bit of learning as well, because Icehouse itself has grown quite a bit the last 2 years. That platform was a great platform. But at the same time, we've probably had some bumps like all businesses, when you kind of forget you've got to do some of the discipline stuff. Got a lot of people now, and sometimes the wheels fall off, as everyone knows in businesses.
What people perhaps sometimes forget is this is a business. I mean, you have to make a profit. You perhaps don't have that commercial objective of having to return a dividend to shareholders, but you have to run it. So how do you balance that objective between what you're trying to achieve as output at the same time as actually running it as a business?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, right? Because as the chief executive, when people ask me how I'm going, I say, well, we've got 29% year-on-year growth and our EBITDA is this, and they kind of look back at me strangely, because their expectation is that I would talk about the companies. And that's true, because we are about the companies growing. But, at the same time, got to run a business. So, look, I think we're going really well. I think making a profit is largely irrelevant as long as the money doesn't run out. But what we've observed is that we actually need to generate the margin, so that we can actually invest in getting more really good people, and that we can have better products that actually help companies. And what we don't want to be is the lowest common denominator. We don't really want to help the bottom of the barrel, no chance people. We want to help the people who have the potential. So as a business, I think we're going well. We're really lucky that we can lean on a bunch of successful entrepreneurs. We can call up Don Braid and say, can we come and talk to your guys to understand how you did this? And people like him are incredibly generous in sharing their learnings, not only to us but others. And so I think we're really lucky. We've been incredibly lucky with people like Boston Consulting Group, who've actually said, you guys don't understand strategy, why don't we send one of our guys to do that? I mean, to give you an example, one of my Ice Angels, Igor Strakinski, the other day rang me up and said, hey, I've got 2 weeks free, I'll give you some pro bono time to come in and do some consulting to help you work out how you're going. It's just incredible that we are so lucky in that regard.
So you do have that, and the relationships are very important in this business, and there is a willingness of people to share, to co-create value. So is that something that you find actually is increasing, coming easier perhaps than during that startup phase for the Icehouse?
Yeah, it is. I think at the same time, collaboration is a really dangerous thing, right? Because lots of people from the outside of the New Zealand ecosystem will say, oh, we all need to collaborate. The reality is, I love it. We had some Israeli people here this week, and the question was asked, so do you guys collaborate? And of course I knew what the answer was, which is no. in Israel, we've got business to do and we make money, and we will only collaborate to achieve that, but we're not going to go and hold hands with other people because it's nice. And I think in New Zealand, the collaboration thing for a purpose is important, but for any other reason, it's irrelevant. What we want to be able to do is get great talent around companies and accelerate them. And, you and I have been talking about your observations that the pace and speed is not enough. And I think, it's one of the things that, Jim Collins talks about facing the brutal facts. I think all of us can never get too comfortable. And, the Icehouse, we're sitting there going, how fast are these companies going? What more could we do to help pick that pace up? Because you just got to get on a plane and go to Shanghai or go to San Francisco, and it's electric, and it's not electric here.
And that's a good point, because when we look at the equivalent models, Israel that you've mentioned, Silicon Valley, Shanghai. So when we benchmark against them, we're creating a New Zealand model. But is it a New Zealand model to suit New Zealand conditions, or is it a New Zealand model that should be reflective of those global trends?
Look, I think all of us should draw off what other people are doing and then adapt it into our environment. For the owner-managed family businesses, they don't want to be like the Facebooks of this world, but they do want to build the best business they can, that's the most profitable, that's the most sustainable, that employs local people, that they're very proud of to be an owner of. Bernie Crosby's, the family business, Pro-Life Foods in Hamilton. So they're very aspirational around that. And they are demanding of what is the best way to do that. But what we all need to do is to really think about how we can use that best practice. But we shouldn't copy. We will never be like Silicon Valley. It's just not going to be like that. But we have the complexity in that. One thing I see with a lot of the younger companies is, how do you shorten that time frame when they go to Mumbai, they go to Singapore, before they're sustainable? And then the bigger ones who are already offshore, it's how do they actually really improve what they're doing in that regard. So, I think you just see that there needs to be more pace generally, and that you can't get away from competence. I sort of talk about, you only need two things in business: aspiration and competence. And funnily enough, startups have massive aspiration and no competence. Established businesses, most of them have quite minimal aspiration and good competence. But when you want to go to, from 20 million to 200 million, that's a different thing. So
you're also seeing some changes, particularly young entrepreneurs, the way that they're approaching the model. What have been some of the changes you've observed about the way they engage with the market during that establishment startup phase?
Well, there's so many more inputs in life these days. So we talk about a lot of people having short attention spans because of email and Twitter and those sorts of things. What I love about the young startup entrepreneurs now is that they just get on a plane and they go and camp in San Francisco for a month.
Backpacker style.
Yeah, they do. They don't go and stay in the flash hotels, or they sleep on couches. They use, Airbnb, couch surfing, and they're doing that in Asia as well. And then they come back. And so, part of my advice these days is to the guys is just get on a plane, go and check it out, then come back with that knowledge, because then you're not assuming. And I think what happens, Parrot Analytics, which is one of our companies we've just raised some money for, the guys had never been to, they're Middle Eastern founders, they'd never been to America. They went to America and were eyes wide open, and we're like, right, we now kind of get it. And now they come back, and then they'll do a whole lot more work, and then they'll go back.
So it's like an experiential learning.
Yeah, I think what's happened is people are not linear anymore. And actually, one of my big criticisms of New Zealand growing up here is that everything was linear. You went through primary school, you went to secondary school, you went to university, you went to business. There was no overlap. And so I'd love to see, the opportunity where kids actually see business a lot earlier, and they overlap in that regard, because that's actually how you, I think, advance, and there's too much linear behaviour in the past.
So when you look at your KPIs for the Icehouse, what's the most important metric for you?
So our goal is 1,000 businesses of international quality by 2020. So that's our selfish goal. If I look at the companies that we work with, for us it's customer sat. So we have a minimum of 85% customer sat across the business, and anything that dips below that, warning signals go off in the control panel of the Icehouse, and we're following up, so what's going on. Growth factors around revenue, EBIT growth for those businesses, capital raised, and FTE growth across all of the businesses that we work with. Back into the Icehouse, we've got the simple 2,500 leads this year, 650 customers, and trying to achieve 50 businesses of international quality. So we're quite metric driven around those sorts of things, and we have to be, because if we're not generating those leads, we can't convert. So, it's interesting, we're just like any other sales-based organisation. Without customers, we're screwed.
Is it important that the Icehouse keeps growing, or should it only get to a certain level and then manage the capacity within that? Is there a risk that you just simply keep growing the Icehouse and therefore you perhaps dilute some of the quality of the output?
I think, first and foremost, that has to be in the context of what we're trying to achieve. So, our run rate is below where we need to be to get to 2020. So what that means is that we have an ambition to increase the number of businesses we work with, because we think that's our benefit to New Zealand, which is the more New Zealand business owners invest in their capability, we think that New Zealand would be better off. The second side is, how do we help those businesses convert? And so I think there is an argument there that says you don't want to get too big in what you do, because it's about the conversion to successful businesses, which is really important. So I think we play with that a bit. We get worried, when you start a business, you know everyone, right? You talk to customers. When you get to 600 customers, let alone 6,000, it's a very different environment. But I go back to, we're an NZ Inc. asset owned by a charitable trust. It is behoven upon us to make the impact that our, I suppose, shareholders and board have an aspiration for us, and we need to achieve that, which means we are going to get bigger, but we've got to make choices. So we opened in the Hawke's Bay this year as a trial, and then we're looking at Canterbury and Bay of Plenty. That makes us uncomfortable, and that's a good thing. We might fail in those areas, but it's not the plan to fail. But by doing that, we're now working with more customers, learning more, hopefully not being seen as those wankers from Auckland who just sit in their ivory towers, and actually getting into the regions and helping.
What about the ecosystem that's talked about? And we've seen developments of initiatives like the Kiwi landing pad now in San Francisco. What more could be done to build the ecosystem from your perspective?
Well, what I love about what the founders of Kiwi Landing Pad did, is the impact it now has. I'll give you an example. A couple of the guys from the Bank of New Zealand went up to the Kiwi Landing Pad and came back and went, "We get it. We understand. They said, we've got to do this in China."
Which is interesting, because it's just a room, really, isn't it? But it's the concept that works.
But it's amazing, right? People need to see it. So, look, I think, I think all of us in the system need to hold ourselves accountable to, are we doing the best that we can do? You only got to spend time offshore and see the struggles the companies have to know we are not doing enough. We are not being as effective as we could be. And that doesn't mean we need more resource. That means we need to utilise the resources more effectively. Number one issue, ultimately, is the capability we have in our teams to grow the company successful. There's some amazing leaders who are doing incredible stuff, like the Zeros of this world, that we all need others to follow in that regard. But I do think we could do better. I think there are challenges around investor returns. But, when I compare it to 2001, people didn't understand what a term sheet was. Now they do. Now there's more sophistication around exchange rate management. There's less whinging around compliance and more focus around, how do I access talent? How do I do this? How do I do that? So I'm encouraged, but at the same time, I think all of us need to step back. You and I have been talking, when we think about the work that we do with startups, we're starting to go, we think, there could be a better way here than what we've done. It's, we're very proud of our outcomes, but we also look at that and go, it's a lot of effort to get, a couple of good businesses out, and maybe we could tweak the model in a way that would make it more effective from an economic perspective.
And what excites you about thinking about the next couple of years? What would be something that you'd be really pinning your hopes on?
I just think, we're ultimately, our business is about helping companies grow. What we get excited about is hearing the stories of the entrepreneurs going to Shanghai, going to, Myanmar, going to San Francisco and succeeding. International capital coming here, seeing more deals happen, more staff being created. So for me, the exciting bit is more of that, as well as I'd say, 2 years ago, we started doing coaching for clients across New Zealand. Why? Because we used to run programs and people would say, I want to implement. We've got 80 coaching clients now, and we love it. Why do we love it? Because we can see that we're actually helping those businesses go to the next level. So, I think I wrote recently, what will I be doing in 10 years? I hope the same thing.